Welcome to Rocky Mountain Marketing. I'm your host, Katie Brinkley. Join us as we dive deep with the world's leading digital marketing experts every single Tuesday. It's all about giving you the strategies that are working right now, directly from those who are making an impact. With my 20 years of experience, I'm here to help you navigate the world of digital marketing. Whether you're looking to sharpen your skills or transform your business, you're in the right place. Let's get started on today's journey to success. Welcome back to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. For those of you that have listened to the show for a while, you know that I've been doing this show for about 4 years. This podcast changed my business. I come from radio, but I always wanted to have a podcast. I just didn't know how to get started. Once I got started, holy cow, now I do 2 episodes a week and I haven't missed it in 4 years. It's just crazy. When I was talking about podcasting at Social Media Marketing World this past February, I was sitting down with somebody who we run in a lot of the same circles. They also have a podcast. They have a live show. They also come from radio, and we had a lot in common. And today's guest, they actually used to work at a marketing agency, and he had 2 choices. He could figure out how to get big content marketing results with less work or get fired. Spoiler alert, he didn't lose his job, but he started sharing what he found out others on YouTube were doing, and he grew to over 150,000 subscribers and has helped over 1 million people around the world. And now he does that. He focuses on helping entrepreneurs design a special kind of podcast called a Modcast. I know that you guys are probably sitting there saying, a Modcast? What is this? Really, but that's what we're going to talk about today is what a Modcast is. It becomes your entire marketing system, grows your audience, which we all want more people to be aware of us and our business. It grows your authority. It grows your leads. It grows your sales. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome my friend Jerry Potter to the show today. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us on Rocky Mountain Marketing.
I'm excited to be here. The way you described that, I was like, oh man, if I was listening, I would be so skeptical right now. Those were a lot of big claims that she just said.
Well, and you know, it's funny because I got to see you speak at Social Media Marketing World. Well, in addition to getting to sit down and hang out with you and learn about your history in radio, but you also make a little bit of fun of yourself, and on your title screen, you had Harry Potter. And in my mind, as I was reading your intro, I kept saying, make sure you don't say Harry, make sure you don't say Harry. And as soon as I said Jerry, I was like, was I supposed to say Harry?
I use that as a mnemonic device now because I did it a little bit and I wasn't comfortable with it, but I had so many people say, I couldn't remember your name. And then I remembered it rhymed with the boy wizard. I was like, okay, that's what we're going to do now.
And Jerry, like you said, those are some big claims that I did with your intro. And you do 2 shows, 2 live stream podcasts. I think you've really kind of figured out a unique way to use the power of voice to grow your authority. That's one of the things that I love about podcasting is it's so intimate to have the ability to talk directly to someone, and you can tell when someone gets excited. You can tell when someone's bored. You can tell when somebody is reading something off of a screen. The power of audio is amazing. And you come from radio. You and your wife both come from radio. So before we really get in too much to the whole Modcast sort of framework that you have developed, you know, what was your first draw into the podcasting realm of marketing?
When we worked in radio, and my wife and I hosted a show together for over 15 years. And I remember when podcasting started to become a thing. This was 2005. And so we started putting out parts of our show as a podcast because I've always loved technology. Nobody really knew what they were yet. We even did a video podcast of some like stunts that we did on our radio show. It was like, okay, well, I still think this is going to get big. And so off it went. But this whole idea of modcasting was kind of an accident. I had this incident where, I guess we'd call it an incident. November 2022, I was coming off of one of my biggest years ever. But then all of a sudden, my income just started dropping. So in December, I was like, it's the holidays. People are distracted. And then January went down again. And I was like, oh, this isn't good. And then February went down again. And my income went down 70% in 4 months. I'd raised my rates that year and things were going well. I was talking to a coach and I was like, people that are in my world are getting great results and they seem very happy, but I can't convert cold people. I can't bring anybody in anymore. It's not working. And one of them said, well, you need to nurture them better. I was like, yeah, I mean, when people, it sounds weird to say now, but I was like, when people hang out with me, like they go, okay, yes, I'm in. How do I get them to hang out more? So the original plan was actually not to start a podcast. It was to start a live show. And so I was going to do this weekly live stream and I was going to use it because, I mean, live video, if you can get people to show up, is an incredible way to connect one to many. And so we started this live show. But when we did it, my wife and I sat down and I said, okay, how can I apply? We did live shows, 15 hours of live broadcasting when we were in radio every week, 15 hours of content, if you can imagine that. Yeah. On top of not counting commercials and music. So we took the approach from radio and our radio show to this live show. And I think if we'd sat down to do a podcast, we wouldn't have done that. And you and I wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So that was kind of the beginning. But as you can imagine, live shows are exhausting. We were traveling and I was getting up. We were in Japan and Australia and I was getting up at 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. to do the live show. And even my guests are like, are you okay? Why are you sitting in the dark kitchen at 4 a.m.? It looks like you just woke up. I was like, I did. So we abandoned that, but we kept the elements and put it into the podcast version of the show. That's when all this came together. And slowly but surely, people started asking, what do you do when I see this happening? And that's kind of when I started to switch a little bit from full-time, social media help to helping people with podcasts as well.
And podcasting is it ever a content generating machine? I think that this is what I've been talking about. I think you and I actually talked about this at the conference, but, gone are the days of just, if you're a realtor, the just listed, just sold, open house posts, the generic Canva templates of Happy Mother's Day. Like those days are gone of social media. I think it happened because of the pandemic when we all were given a bit of the gift of time to be like, all right, well, let's really focus on how we can show up on social media. TikTok changed everything. Yeah. But I think that if you have a podcast, that's what really makes you stand out from the crowd because you're never going to run out of content to share.
Well, voice, I've always felt this way, and you work in radio too. Voice builds this intimacy unlike anything else. It's not just voice. Video obviously builds trust in a big way. But with audio podcasts specifically, it's usually somebody consuming it by themselves in headphones, in their car, wherever it might be. And so that alone is a different experience than a group of people watching a movie or a TV show or anything like that. So I think that's one of the really powerful things. Plus the convenience, you can download, they don't have to be online. There's so many great things about it. I love your example of the Happy Mother's Day post. When this shift was happening, I was teaching people, I'm like, you can't do this. And at the time, the dry cleaner in my neighborhood, I don't even know why I was following the Facebook business page because it's like I need dry cleaning once every 2 years, but posted a RIP Aretha Franklin post, whenever that was. Yeah. And there was no tie to Aretha Franklin. They just felt like, oh, this is happening. I better put something up. And we did go through that phase where businesses were like, hey, happy cheeseburger day. No, we're not a restaurant. We're actually vegan, but happy cheeseburger day. So it was that thing over and over again. And I'm glad we've evolved past them because content has gotten so much better for all of us.
It really has. It's kind of like the people that are still... If you're a business and you're still posting that type of content, you let this podcast episode be your wake-up call too, that those days are gone. That's why social media is not working for you. I want to really kind of shift it into where social media is going. If you have that ability to share your voice, share your unique differentiator. If you're a vegan restaurant and what's the goal behind your community online? What is that? What is it that you do that's different from the rest of the people out there? When you have the ability to have that podcast, you're never going to run out of content ideas because you're constantly showing up and talking about different values that you and your business believe in. Let's talk about how you can create the type of content that actually works if you're a busy entrepreneur, because I know a lot of people say like, man, I have a hard enough time just creating, like you said, the generic Happy Mother's Day post. Now you want me to launch a podcast? How can I actually do this?
Our approach to this, and you mentioned modcasting at the beginning. I'll tell you why it's called that in just a second. But if you're somebody who has a love-hate relationship with made-up words like I do, like when I hear a made-up word, sometimes I go, oh, I love that. Other times I go, oh, I do not like that. When we first started calling them modcast, I was very uncomfortable with it, but it just made sense. The main thing that we want to be doing is we can't be creating 27 different types of content, right? Especially if you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, unless you are a full-time creator, and that is your job, is creating content, which is not true for most businesses. We can't do that. And that was why I started my YouTube channel originally, because at the time it seemed like everybody was teaching content, social media marketing training that was as though it was your full-time job, like it was for full-time marketers. And it was great. But if you had 1 hour a week, how are you going to do that? So what we've found is the key, and this has changed in the last couple of years. I wouldn't have even attempted this 2 years ago, is you can create a podcast in about less than an hour, really, that becomes all of your other content. It's not traditional repurposing, which has always been flawed. Traditional repurposing is, all right, I created that big long thing, that big long YouTube video or that big long podcast. Now I'm going to go back through and figure out, what can I pull out and turn into something else? You put all this time in, and then if you even finish the process, you end up with a bunch of often mediocre content that came out of it that wasn't as good as your original thing. And that's why it's not very effective. So our approach, we go in, and this is how we plan radio shows. We didn't come in and just talk about the same thing for 15 hours. Yeah. We went in and we planned the show into modules, as we called them. And so, segments, as they're often called in TV. And each module, it was designed to achieve a different thing. So for example, at 7:45 a.m., when we thought moms were in the car with their kids, we might do something to appeal to moms. At 9:15, when college kids might just be getting up because they were both part of our audience, we would appeal to them. Some things were designed to sell. Some things were designed to get somebody to come back the next day. But each module had its own goal. And together, it became this really powerful, cohesive brand that also became other content for on the air, off the air. We sold CDs, all kinds of stuff back then. The idea of a modcast is a module-based podcast. And so that's where that came from. One of the key things is when you create the show, it's already broken up and designed to become your Instagram Reels or a video for your community or whatever else it might be. So once you're done recording, you don't have to record any other content. When we talk about video, sometimes people are like, well, I'm not doing a video podcast. I'm not showing up on camera. I'm like, you can shower once a month, crank out a few episodes, and then sit in your filth for 29 days if you want. But I know getting camera ready is challenging, and there's more pressure for women. I'm married to a woman that worked in media. So I get that. But because we can batch, even that challenge can go away pretty quickly.
I love that. I actually wanted to talk about audio only podcasts or doing a video podcast or incorporating both. If you decide not to put it up on YouTube or anything like that, if you turn the camera on, exactly what you said, you'll have the other content recorded for social media, the video side, because video is so important these days. I'm one of those people. I was recording my podcast on Zoom for up until about 2 years ago when I switched over to Riverside FM, and I was still recording it on Zoom, but I was only using the audio up until about 2 years ago because I was afraid for people that are watching this episode, you can see that I keep looking over at my notes and my eyes are going off screen because I want to make sure that I'm leading Jerry along the conversation the way that I want this podcast to go. I was afraid, like, oh man, I'm not looking at the camera the whole time. People will know that I have notes, and it's fine. I mean, it's fine like that.
Totally.
If you look off camera, it's fine if you but I had a hair go in my eye, and Jerry's a champ and just kept on going while I was rubbing my eye and trying to get the hair out. I mean, things happen. And if you're not using the video side of things, you're missing out on that content. I'm not going to go and post me rubbing my eye on YouTube, as a short by itself, but you have all the other great content that you can share. So with these, and I guess before we go back to the Modcast, because I think it's a brilliant idea, but video versus audio, what are your thoughts on doing, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, YouTube is not just a spot for you to put your podcast. There's a different culture. There's different ways of doing it. And What are your thoughts as having a video first podcast, having an audio first podcast, having a YouTube channel? Kind of explain what those differences are and how you guide your clients through that process.
Yeah, I recently made a video for my YouTube channel. Like, what is the freaking difference between a YouTube video and a YouTube video podcast? And it's very subtle and it's not even worth going into right now. But I mean, there are differences, and part of it is the distribution. And that's what podcasts are all about, is the distribution. So when I look at audio versus video, there's a few things here. One, I would never now in this day and age do an audio only show. Now, if you've been doing audio, adding video is another component, and we can talk about how that can be made more efficient. But these days I look at audio versus video as it's kind of like a car and a jet, right? They'll both get you from LA to New York, but the jet's going to get you there way faster, way more efficiently, with way more results. And then it can take you to London or Bangkok or Sydney or wherever else you want to go. The amount of advantages with video in terms of building trust and the repurposing content and all that is so big. And the barrier to video, from tech to time to AI, is so much lower than it was even 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm all about video. That being said, some people are saying I'm only going to do video. It's like, oh gosh, no. Like, audio podcasting is still growing and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I think it's 79% of Americans now know what a podcast is, and 40% of them listen to at least one monthly. It's still growing there. So I think both together is sort of the ultimate combination. Just to go back to your thing about, oh, well, I've got to look at the camera. Just a quick story. When I worked in radio, we'd do things on stage. I worked as a charity auctioneer for a while because I loved going out and helping these nonprofits raise money. And there's no way I was remembering an entire presentation. So I had to take my notes up there. But I had that same thing. I don't want them thinking I'm looking at my notes. So a little thing that I started doing was I would refer to my notes. And I still do the same thing when I'm going live now. Look at your notes and literally verbally say, hang on, I want to check my notes because I want to get this right for you. That makes the presenter feel better. And then the audience is like, oh, thanks. I appreciate you not, giving me the wrong information or saying it wrong or, whatever it might be.
Yeah. With my quick cast episodes, I try to bring in some statistics. And I was finding like, gosh, I have to make sure I remember all these statistics, and I don't want to get them. I was like, why am I worried? I just look off to the side and say, according to blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
It's okay if I look off cameras.
Yes.
Well, and there's different AI tools that can creepily make it so that you're giving direct eye contact and never looking away. Now, you got to love AI. It's always there to help make things creepy. But, so with having your show, I'm so glad that I started turning on the camera. I used to get really, really nervous. And it did take a while for me to not be camera shy. Now that I do it, I have a really expensive camera that I use for a lot of our clients when we record their podcasts for them. But right now, that the battery died on that one, I'm just using my iPhone camera. My iPhone is the camera that's being used right now to record this episode. Don't overthink things too much and really just get started is the biggest thing. With people that are doing a podcast and they say, okay, well, you make it sound really easy with your Modcast system, which we'll go into in a little bit here, a little bit deeper, Jerry. You say, turn on the camera. Okay, I guess I could do that. I was just talking into the voice notes. So I can turn on the camera. You're making it all sound really easy. There's no excuses, but no one listens to my show. Like, I'm only getting like maybe 13 downloads, 20 downloads, 50 downloads. And that's where I'm curious what your thoughts are, Jerry, on this, for how big your podcast audience really needs to be to make it be profitable. And now for a quick break. You've heard me mention some of my favorite tools on Rocky Mountain marketing in the past, and today I want to talk to you about Podmatch. Podmatch is the tool that you need if you're looking for more shows to guest on to elevate your brand authority, or if you're a podcast host yourself and you've been looking for the perfect guest, Podmatch is your solution. Podmatch matches guests and hosts through their system, and I've had a tremendous luck with them over the past 5 years. Check out Podmatch at joinpodmatch.com/Katie. All right, let's get back to the show.
A couple of things I want to share here, and I'm so glad that you asked this question. So we at Modcast Marketing, we work with specifically with entrepreneurs for podcasts. If we get asked sometimes like, yeah, I want to start this podcast about my hobby and get sponsors. And it's like, okay, we don't teach sponsors. We don't teach that. That's just not where our sweet spot is. If somebody wants to ask us, we can certainly talk about that. And so our goal is literally to help you make money from episode 1. Theoretically, if one person listens and it's the right person at the right time and your call to action is the right offer for them to download a freebie or whatever it is, it should convert. So this does a couple of things. One, it obviously, as you said, relieves the pressure of I won't find an audience, so it won't work, or I won't have an audience of thousands for years and years or whatever it might be. But when you set this up the right way, it can happen right away. And I've actually gotten leads and that have converted from my podcast that have not actually listened to my podcast. This actually just happened like a month ago, where I took a clip of my podcast and I put it up as an Instagram reel with the guest, and it did really well. And when somebody joined my program, we say, hey, do you remember where you first heard about Jerry Potter? And she said, yes, I saw the clip of you and so on Instagram and looked into you. So the first time I messaged with her, I said, oh, so then did you go listen to the podcast episode? She goes, no, I've never heard your podcast. So literally from the clip alone, like this is somebody who never listened to my show, but still came in and invested in a program from just seeing a clip of the show. So that there's all of these things that can happen when we make ourselves visible and put ourselves out there. And it does not need that podcast technically could have 0 downloads. And I still could have had somebody invest $1,000 to work with me. So that's what I love to tell people about. It does not take much at all.
So true. This is the thing too. Like this show is pretty targeted. We have a pretty consistent listener rate. Like one episode just like completely skyrocketed and we had about 7,000 downloads for this one episode. But for the most part, our episodes are very close to just being business owners in Colorado. I do have some of the outliers in Illinois and New York and California, but it's like 70% demographics of listenership is here in Denver. I think that that's where you look at your demographics, look to see who's listening, and then how can you create the content for them that is really, whether they listen or not, make sure that that's the same type of people that are following you over on social media. Because if you're creating a bunch of content and maybe I'm creating content and it's only being listened to people over in Europe, well, man, maybe is my Instagram following over in Europe too? Like maybe I should change up some of the stuff I talk about or some of my guests, you know? Let's talk a little bit more about how you can make sure that you are different ways of monetizing and getting a profit from your podcast, regardless of, you know, listener size. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, if I have a podcast, we would all love to be like the next Joe Rogan. How am I going to monetize by the listenership?
Yeah, well, we like to start with leads for your business, whatever it might be, because it is the lowest hanging fruit. It's how you can get people from episode 1. It might even be a friend of yours that never understood what you do until they heard an episode and they're just like, oh, I need to work with you. I didn't know what you did. They see these spattering of Facebook posts and they never kind of put it all together. But even before that, some of the clients we've worked with, the strategy is that they interview people on their podcast that are potential clients. And so that's another situation where you could have 0 downloads, 0 listens, and still get a client from it. We can start really small there, but then you build from there. Sponsorships is probably the most popular one. There are podcast hosts like Buzzsprout, where they will actually put ads in your show. And it doesn't necessarily matter how small it is, as long as you've got a decent following. YouTube obviously will put ads on things. So there's that there, but you can sell low priced things. Gosh, I have never made a list, but there's so many ways that you can, what can you add to this list, Katie? Because I know I've seen you talking about this with people.
Yeah, I think that exactly what you said, like having the guests be the lead gen. One of the things that we do for our show is that I will have my business be the sponsor if I'm doing something like I'm doing a 1-day intensive coming up here. And so I'll have that be the sponsor of the show. I think that a lot of people think, why not have your own show? Get that best spot of your own business, be the sponsor of your show. I do have different sponsors that have come forward. I've partnered with where they actually pay to have that mid-roll spot. They get the positioning in my email newsletter. But I think that one of the one that I love the most is having your business be the sponsor of the show and not really relying on the listeners signing up to work with you. I think that maybe that's a little different of like being, oh, I'm going to get 20,000 downloads an episode. Everyone's going to want to sponsor me and and it's, man, that's hard to do.
It's a whole other job.
It is.
Going out and selling advertising. I mean, you work in radio. I mean, that's a whole other thing. Like, radio stations have massive teams that would do that. For most of us as small business owners, we don't have that, nor do I want to do that at all. So yeah, I love that.
So let's dive into a little bit more of the Modcast structure. You gave us kind of a high level overview of it. I think it's really groundbreaking with the ease of taking your audio and your video and make it's kind of like a different version. I have my 4-post strategy to make it easier to create content and remain consistent. This is another strategy that I think a lot of small business owners will identify with and say, actually, it doesn't need to be as hard as I've been making it. So let's talk about the Modcast a little bit more.
Yeah. So when we first started doing this on my personal podcast, 6 Ways, it was, just felt very natural because that's what we did in radio. The first time I talked to a potential client about it, I was ready for them to go, that sounds like more work. Like now I have to do shows within shows. And then the first time we taught it in a group setting, like in a workshop online, I thought, oh, the same thing. But I think no one has ever thought that. That was kind of, I think, in my own head. I want to make sure that if you're listening to this or watching this and you feel like that at the end, then I didn't do a good job explaining it. Here's how it would look. So the show is made up of modules, which are like individual segments that are going to make up the whole show. Your listener is not going to go, what happened to the show? If you do this well, they're going to think, wow, this show's really good and they're doing some really cool stuff. They're not going to go, it feels like somebody's changing the channel while I'm watching Netflix or changing the stream, midway through. It's not going to feel like that at all. So we build it into modules. And so we have the first module we call the confirmation module. This is where your hook for your podcast is going to go. But we kind of also talk about the other things that need to happen there. So for example, I know when I listen to podcasts, it's usually audio and they're in a playlist. When I hear about something, I add it to my playlists. And I've got a couple of yours in there, Katie, that I haven't gotten to yet, and many that I have. So it'll just come on. And so we need to remind people, just like we did in radio, where someone might tune in the middle, we need to remind people what they're listening to at the beginning, not just say, in this episode, you're going to hear this amazing thing. Okay, here it is. We want to remind people because they may not remember the show, where they heard about it, any of that kind of stuff. So that's one of the ones that we have. We have another one called the vibe check module. And this is kind of like your intro. And we recommend produced intros for podcasts if you're going to do video, because it gives you the opportunity when your podcast goes on YouTube to have some movement and B-roll and have it, if the rest of it is just you talking to a camera, which is fine, at least in the beginning, there's kind of a cool thing that you create once and you can use it over and over again. And so we call that the vibe check module, because that's when somebody is, coming into the show, and if they're new, is this for me? I'm checking the vibe. My wife, Candy, who's very creative, named it that. And the first time I taught it, I was like, oh, I feel so weird calling this the vibe check module. But then everybody that was in our program immediately was like, hey, check out my vibe check, or can you look at my vibe check? Like, it just immediately became a thing. I was like, okay, I guess I thought for sure we were going to rename it something more generic. She pushes my creative boundaries, which is really nice. But I want to tell you about my favorite module, and anyone who has a show or is considering a show can literally add this right now. And we call it the TSL module. So when we worked in radio, we had basically 2 types of ratings. One was how many people listened to your show or your station. And that was usually called the CUM, the cumulative number of listeners. And then we had the time spent listening, or TSL. And so those 2 things made up what your rating was. How many people were listening overall, and then how long did they listen? So we call it the TSL module because it's designed to do 3 things, okay? It goes at the end of your episode, and it is designed to get people to listen to more of the show. So it becomes something that you can tease at the beginning, that even if they're just kind of so-so on your core content, they still want to wait for that. The second thing is it's designed to get people to actually listen to your call to action, which for us goes in something called the conversion module, because you do it right after your call to action. So how many times have we listened to a podcast and we're like, wow, that was really good. And they're like, by the way, if you'd like to download a free thing, and we're like, next, it's gone, we're gone. And so we do this thing right after that they want to hear, so they stay through. So that's the other reason that we call it that time spent listening, is to keep them listening through that. And then the third purpose is because it's teasable. Obviously, if you're going to get people to listen, it's got to be something they want to hear. It's already designed to become an additional piece of content, a reel, a short, an SEO optimized YouTube video, whatever you decide it's going to be. So I'll give you an example. My show on the 6 Ways, every week we have a question of the week at the end. This is how simple it can be. And we just have an additional question that the guest and I answer at the end that is on the same topic as whatever the core content is. So if we're doing an episode like 6 Ways to Take More Time Off in Your Business Without Losing Income was one we did. Amazing woman, Alicia, who has literally taken summers off to be with her kids for 20 years from her business, which sounded impossible till we had that conversation. But at the end, the question of the week, and this was a while ago, so I don't remember what it was. So I'll make up one now. But the question of the week at the end might have, when I'm away, how should I set up replying to my clients so they don't get mad, or something like that. So anyone who is thinking about taking more time off in their business, that's going to be one of their immediate concerns. But then when we take that and we put it up as an Instagram reel, you ever wonder how you should keep your clients informed while you're gone in case they need something? Here's our favorite way. And it becomes its own piece of content. So that's the TSL module. That's my favorite. Anyone can add it to an existing show or build a new show with it. And it's really, really powerful.
Jerry, I love this. I love your Modcast formula. I think it makes it very easy to work smarter, not harder, have those assets created. It's similar to the 4-post strategy. It's similar, but different, but the biggest idea from it is you can have a very strong online digital presence when you go in with a strategy behind what you're putting out there in the digital universe, whether it's creating those short clips that's great for the podcast, and it's great for short form. It's great for YouTube. You need to know what the intention is behind what you're putting out there. And if you don't know, like, oh, I don't know, I just thought I should post this, then it's a waste of everyone's time, including yours. So if people want to learn more about the Modcast, and I know you guys have an entire coaching program around it and everything. So if people want to learn more about it, get in touch with you. I mean, obviously they should listen to your podcast, the 6 Ways podcast. But how can people learn more about this Modcast strategy?
So easiest thing to do, you can just go to modcastmarketing.com. And we've got some free resources and trainings there that kind of walk through how this all works. Some of the important pieces about how video can take the same amount of time as audio once you kind of have it set up, including the editing. And just for reference, like I hired my friend's daughter to edit the video podcast, and it takes her about 10 minutes a week. Again, because tech has gotten so good. I saw your eyes open. We can talk about this after we're done if you want, Katie. But the tech is so good now. And so lots of different things there that can help you do this. And you can do a little bit of it, like just add a TSL module, or you can add redesign or start from scratch and build the whole thing. But the way people have been responding to this, when we first looked into doing this, and I say we a lot because my wife, Candy, has been a big part of this as well. When we first looked into doing this, I do what you usually do if you're looking at a new business idea. You interview a bunch of people, you do surveys. And I did this survey of a bunch of business owners with podcasts. One of the questions I asked was, is your podcast having a direct impact on your business? It was not a multiple choice question. It was a fill in the blank. And the number one answer was not yes, unfortunately, but it also wasn't no. It was not yet. And the amount of people that replied that way, at first I was like, oh, that's a bummer. But then I was like, I love that the hope is still there, right? They love what they're doing so much. Our first client had put out 170 episodes and never gotten a trackable lead from it, but she just kept going because she enjoyed it. And now she's getting leads, which is great. But whether you don't have a show or you're in that not yet category, there is hope there. That's our drive for why we want to do this, is because this works so well. It's simpler than it can be. You can make it complex. Go to modcastmarketing.com and you can get a lot of cool stuff there that can help.
Amazing. I love it, Jerry. Thank you so much for joining us on Rocky Mountain Marketing today. So many great insights shared. Folks, go listen to Jerry's show. We will include everything in the show notes here so you can get all the links. But Jerry, I can't thank you enough for joining us and sharing all of these great insights on Rocky Mountain Marketing.
I love your show. So honored to be asked, and love this conversation as well. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. I hope you're leaving with valuable insights and the inspiration to lead your market. If you've enjoyed our time together and found today's podcast episode useful, I have a small favor to ask of you. Please hit that subscribe button to stay updated with the latest episodes. And if you know someone who could benefit from these episodes, maybe a fellow business leader or an aspiring entrepreneur, go ahead and share this episode with them. Let's spread the knowledge and grow together. Also, I'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation beyond the podcast. Visit me at katiebrinkley.com to connect, to find more resources, or just to share your journey. And be sure to pick up your copy of my new book, The Social Shift, at katiebrinkley.com/book. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Katie Brinkley, and I can't wait to dive into more strategies and stories with you on the next episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. Let's keep on taking your marketing to new heights.